everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to stand taller in the world, then do we have the Step Into Your Moxie show for you. Today I'll be speaking with Alexia Vernon, speaker, leadership coach, Moxie Maven, and the author of a brilliant book for anyone who wants to find their voice, Step Into Your Moxie. And that's just what I want to talk with her about today, about how to amplify your voice, visibility, and influence in the world. That, plus we'll talk about Milton the chimpanzee, on Zelda and Seven Cats, codependence and razors, headgear, thrust correctors, and rubber bands, turquoise that is, leopards and cheetahs, who on earth is Sally Sunshine Pants, and what in the world wackadoodle dreams have to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Alexia. Are you ready to shine?
I am. I'm excited for this conversation.
Woohoo! We are going to have some fun. So before we dive right into things, please forgive me for asking, what do thrust correctors, headgear, and turquoise rubber bands have to do with anything?
You're forcing me to go back into my stuff and my first question. Oh, I kid. The reason those things are mentioned in the book and why they're significant is that I am not somebody who came naturally to loving to communicate or to give speeches whatsoever. I had a tongue thrust corrector, a jaw realigner, braces, headgear around the time that I gave my very first speech, which did not go well at all. And as a result of that experience where my voice quavered, I cried, I felt like there was a colony of butterflies that had taken up residence in my thoracic cavity. Whenever I would articulate my opinions or get in front of an audience for years, even when I was speaking as a part of my career, I would go right back into that story, which said, when you speak, you are not going to get your message out in a way that connects with people, and you're going to feel really crummy about yourself afterwards. And as a result of that, of course, it became all too often a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, and speaking about self-fulfilling prophecies, then you kind of read my mind. It sounds like you had maybe embarrassing moment after embarrassing moment growing up.
I did. There were times where I would put myself out there because even though I like to say I experienced an on-again, off-again relationship to my voice, meaning that there would be lots of times where I would feel like I was tap dancing on eggshells, striving really hard to be liked and to give the right answers and not wanting to be called out for not being enough of whomever I conjectured other people wanted me to be. There were also these other times where I did recognize I had a lot of privileges afforded to me. I wanted to use those and use my voice to make positive impact for others and would raise my hand to lead. And then I would get into these positions and inevitably something wonky would happen. So one of the stories I talk about in the book is going to space camp because I loved science and being one of the youngest people in that experience, and then recognizing that a lot of the girls were actually making fun of me behind my back, specifically around the fact that I was incredibly hairy because I was younger. I wasn't shaving my legs or shaving my armpits at that time. And it would all become evidence in this story, this self-narrative I was carrying around that I wasn't enough.
It's interesting when you talk about self-narrative because you show very explicit, maybe that's not the right word, but very powerful examples of being way more than enough, and then how the voice would bite you. So Space Camp, you were one of the youngest there, which is like amazing that you got in. But then you tested and you're only middle of the pack compared to people up to 3 years older than you. And here comes Ms. Critical.
Where were you when I was 12 years old and needed to be reminded of those
I'm so
things?
sorry.
And yet we all do that, right? We find ourselves in these moments where we're being stretched to step into our greatness. And when things don't go exactly as planned, when we're human rather than superhuman, how we self-flagellate, as I like to say.
Yes. So speaking of, I don't know if we call it self-flagellation, but how did you end up entering and winning the Miss Junior America pageant?
Great question. The reason I wound up entering is because I had made the decision to leave the first college I was at before college actually started during orientation weekend. Wow. And I had stepped away from almost a full ride. So I don't talk about that in the book. And a lot of the reason that I stepped away was because I was uncomfortable. The first weekend I was there before classes actually started, I went to a keg party and I wasn't a drinker. I was a really good kid and felt so uncomfortable that rather than making the decision to forge relationships with people who wanted to be dry like I did, like I can't go to college. I can't live on a campus in a dorm. And so I left and went closer to home. But what wound up happening because my parents had moved from where we were living is we were paying out of state tuition. And I recognized that until in state tuition kicked in, I needed to raise some money. And so it seemed like a really great idea to be able to do that. Plus, I was a good dancer and I figured I would probably have a fighting chance at the talent component because of my dance. And I like to say that I won, not because I was the best dancer. I actually wound up scoring really low on the talent portion, and rather because of the public speaking section, which of course was the section I was terrified of given my history. But it was one of the first times where I stopped doing the whole dance around, am I going to be liked? Am I going to be smart enough? And instead focused 100% on the audience of about 1,000 people who were there, making them connect with the topic I was speaking on, which was preventing sexual assault on college campuses.
Did you? That's pretty awesome. Afterwards, the next question that's interesting is, what did Ms. Critical, I'm calling her that, what did your inner voice say after you won? Because there's a point that you're on the high, but then does she come chasing you down?
Whew, we're going back almost 20 years at this point. I rode that high for a while, I'm happy to say. However, at that point, I was in a relationship with a guy I should not have been in a relationship with. Sweet, gentle soul, lots of addiction issues. And we'd made the decision to move in together. He wasn't able to hold on to a job because he had a gambling addiction. We live in Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. And I remember saying to myself, I am Miss Junior America, and I'm living in this hellacious one-bedroom cockroach-infested apartment with a guy that at 19 I'm going to school full-time. I'm supporting. Like, what happened? So I don't want to necessarily say that that's the critic, because that was reality. But what I did do was move into one of the other voices I talk about. So the critic is that voice who says, I'm not smart enough, I'm not funny enough, I'm not hairless enough, I'm not something enough. We can also have the voice of the cop, and I was very cop-like in that point. There is the right career path for me, or there's the wrong career path for me. There's the right college, the right guy, the wrong guy. And that when we do that to ourselves, we get paralyzed. And I was really paralyzed for a couple of years where I stayed in that situation, overworking, still pursuing top grades, getting a 4.0, and ultimately using a lot of my winnings to start a nonprofit after-school leadership development program for girls, and feeling very ragged as a result.
Thank you for sharing on that. So let's dive into more some of the terms, some of the things in the book here. We'll probably double back around in your story, but first off, I guess we've got to set the stage. What do you mean by Moxie, and why did the White House call you a Moxie Maven?
In terms of definition, I love the word Moxie because it's a more playful version of the word confidence. It suggests having nerve and verve. And when I talk about stepping into your Moxie, I mean, it's the ability to cultivate the mindset and the behaviors to be able to walk into any room, or for those who are pursuing visibility opportunities, onto any stage and unapologetically speak up for yourself and the ideas and issues that matter most to you, and know that when you speak, your voice will move people to take action. The answer to the second part of that question, how did I get that term? I fell in love with the phrase step into your Moxie relatively early in my business. And the White House was covering some of the work that I was doing. And Ronnie Cho, who at the time was the associate, I apologize if I'm getting his old title wrong, the associate director, I want to say, of public engagement for the Obama White House, when doing the article, chose Moxie Maven as the title. And I loved it and have appropriated it ever since.
Very, very cool. Early on, you talk about the importance of finding your come to Jesus moments. What's that mean to you?
While I'm a Christian, the term is not necessarily religious. So let me explain. I'm using it affectionately to refer to those moments that have knocked us down, that have made us question whether we are as resilient as we would like to be, but that in hindsight, when we look back, we realize were moments that were happening for us. They were
Yes.
not, as we might have thought when we were going through them, moments that were happening to us, that we had to suffer through and survive. And rather, again, in hindsight, because it's rare we can see this in the moment, have enhanced, have amplified our capacity to thrive. And I believe that those moments are so important because when we can recall them, relive through them, in order to transform them, when we're able to reframe in that way that I just described from something that's happening to us, that's something that's happening for us, we start to see the gifts. And specifically, gifts in terms of our voice. So maybe that moment enabled us to ask people for help if that's something we really struggle with, or enabled us to speak up for ourselves because we had to in order to survive. Maybe it flexed our compassion muscles where we find when other people are struggling, we now feel called to serve them in whatever capacity we could. And that's why I love those moments.
So we've got, and I'm going to put this in order for people: relive, reframe, release. Oh, excuse me. Recall,
Recall
relive,
remembering them first, yes.
reframe, and then release and reapply.
Yes. So let me get to those later R's. So when we release, we unhook from that hope that something could have gone differently than how it did. It is 100% about forgiveness, forgiveness of other key players that might have played a role in that experience, and certainly heaps of self forgiveness for ourselves because we did the best we could with what we had. And the reapply is when we go back to that reframe, so that middle step, how can we make sure that whatever lesson we learned, we apply again and again and again so that we don't have to learn that same lesson over and over?
Thank you. So now going over and over, let's go back to critics, cops, and cheerleaders. Would you mind sharing what happened 2 weeks before your 16th birthday with your favorite cheerleader and how it over the long term helped you?
Yes. So my grandma and I were like this from the moment I was born. My mom, my grandma, my aunt, my mom's side of the family. I mean, I love people on my dad's side of the family too, but there was just a very powerful bond that felt like many past lives we had been together. And for some of you listening, you may know exactly what I'm talking about when you have those bonds with people, whether they're chosen family or whether they're biological family. And in my case, it happened a lot with biological family. And when my grandma died, it was one of those moments where I felt like I was never going to be able to recalibrate again because the loss hit me. And I don't want to say that it was unexpected because there were about 3 weeks where she had gone from full health to having a routine hernia surgery to contracting pneumonia. And so we knew that that was a possible outcome. But I had really thought that I would have lots of years left with my grandma. And I was 16, or almost 16 at the time, and was in a slightly dark phase because that was also the time where I was starting to have, I don't want to say memories because I'd never fully forgotten, but not be able to suppress as much as I had hoped to memories of having overcome sexual abuse as a child. And so it was just a perfect storm of not being able to pep myself up the way that I used to and really going into a dark depression for almost the rest of my high school years.
If you don't mind me asking, and we don't have to go there, since you talked about the foundation, I believe it was, that you started, since you just mentioned what happened as a child,
Sure.
did that become a powerful, nobody wishes it on anybody, but did it
Yes.
become a powerful positive influence in your life?
It did. So at 4 years old, I spoke up and out to both of my parents that a different family member had been sexually abusing me and that I wanted it to stop. And I count myself among the very lucky because that, what I like to refer to as initial act of Moxie,
Yeah.
while it didn't lay the foundation for a lifetime of speaking up and out, it did stop the abuse. And so when I think back on the experience, I wish I could say that there was this linear progression where I always was on the front lines of self advocating. One of the takeaways from that experience was when I spoke up, people did listen, but not everyone was always going to be ready for what I shared. So there were a lot of people in my family who, much like we've seen happen in recent months around people who've made allegations around lots of various figures, that oftentimes the person who has made the accusations gets put on trial. So there were people who tried to say, maybe you're doing this for attention because you're a kid. Maybe you have misremembered that actually it was somebody else who perpetrated these acts. And while I knew it happened and it happened with this particular person, that was really difficult. And a lot of my on again, off again relationship to my own voice revolved around that difficult family dynamic that ensued for a long time. And by the time I was in college, that was when I started doing outreach on my college campus, working to help create a culture where ideally no one was being sexually assaulted, but whether women, men, or anyone who was gender fluid raised their hand and said, I've had this experience, that there were appropriate resources. And what I've seen as somebody who is now a public speaking coach is that many of the women, some men, but particularly women who work with me, have had similar experiences, and that whether their mission in life is about preventing sexual abuse or something completely different, that desire to reclaim their voice and help other people reclaim theirs after abuse is quite a motivator.
Thank you so much for sharing. That brings us
Yeah.
then to the three voices. I'm actually going to even call it four voices: the
Mhm.
critic, the comp, the cheerleader, and the coach.
So most of us at any given moment are walking around with one of those first three voices, and that communication that's going on up here is playing a profound role on the communication that's coming out here, or that isn't. So when we have the voice of the critic in our heads, and we've talked a little bit about her or him already, that's that voice that's always making you feel like you are not enough, because inevitably there's a comparison between you and who you should be, or you and who other people are. That's voice one. Voice two, that voice of the cop, loves to create two categories for everything. There's the right and there's the wrong. There's the good and there's the bad. And when we start to have a worldview that creates those two categories, we often lose the ability to see third, fourth, fifth, sixth options. And as a result, because when we create two options, oftentimes neither looks that great, we feel paralyzed and stuck. And oftentimes we don't say anything. The third voice is the voice of the cheerleader. And at first, the cheerleader sounds fantastic because she or he is sending messages like, it's totally cool that you are exhausted and you have a 12-hour workday ahead. One day you'll retire and then you can catch up on sleep. In other words, that voice of the cheerleader is always saying you can do more, you can push harder. And when we let that voice up here go on and on and on, usually we get exhausted. Sometimes we get sick. Sometimes we get super cranky and we lash out at other people because we feel pushed beyond what we can handle. And oftentimes we burn out. And that's why in the book, I introduce a fourth voice, the voice of the coach. And unlike those other voices that like to hold a microphone and go on like a monologue, the voice of the coach disrupts the monologue and turns it into a dialogue by asking questions from a place of curiosity. So, for example, if you've got the critic who might be saying you're not smart enough, you introduce the voice of the coach who will ask a question like, what's a moment where you did excel? And how can you harness some of who you were then in this current moment? If what you have is the voice of the cop, when you bring in the voice of the coach, that voice will ask a question like, what might be a gray underutilized space between those two poles? For the cheerleader, asking a question like, what could you let go of right now? Or what could you say no to so that you could say yes to yourself? And when we create a habit of any moment we find ourselves getting into debilitating self-talk to bring in the coach, it returns us to the role of protagonist in our story. And usually it starts the chain reaction of positive results where our outer communication is considerably more powerful.
Beautiful. And speaking about a shift towards positivity, would you learn from Dr. Jill, who wrote My
Mhm.
Stroke of Insight about self-talk in the brain?
Yes, I am obsessed in a good way, not a creepy way, with neuroscience. And one actually, she would call herself a neuroanatomist, is Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. And many of you may be familiar with her. She's had a TED Talk. She's been on Oprah, New York Times bestseller. And one of her principles is this idea of 90 seconds, that from the moment we have a thought, any thought, it triggers a physiological response. And when I talk about a physiological response, it means not just we feel happy or sad, but what is our body doing? Do we feel sweat coming off of our hands? Do we feel our heart rate coming up? Do we feel dizzy? Because that thought triggers that physiological response, we are going to experience it, we know from neuroscience, for 90 seconds. Now, to be fair, sometimes that 90 seconds replays over and over and over again, because the minute those 90 seconds are up, we choose the same thought, we have the same response. We choose the same thought, we feel the same way. And once we recognize that, yes, there is a direct correlation between our thoughts and our feelings, it invites us to be so cognizant of what is that thought we choose at the end of those 90 seconds to transform the way we're physiologically experiencing life afterward.
So how do we train the mind to then think the thought of the querying coach?
Practice. Knowing this is going to be my default coach question. So, for example, one of the things, as somebody who's in the middle of a book launch, that I struggle with is time. My default coaching question during this season is, how can I find time for me?
Yes.
So any moment I find myself in a story, I don't have enough time, blah, 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 boring, yawn, eye roll. How can I find enough time for me? And immediately I recalibrate and I feel like I'm in control of the situation. And as a result, that sluggish feeling, it lifts.
Beautiful. So right now, Jessica, my wife, the producer, she's out of town. I'm running everything kind of solo here. She's still doing some behind the scenes work, but my schedule, I don't look as busy as a badge of pride. I do not see
Good.
it that way. However, I look at my schedule this week and I'm like, oh my God. And so my default question is, how can I be more kind, gentle, and loving to myself through this process?
Perfect question. Perfect question.
So
And then the key, of course, is we also have to answer it for
heck yeah.
ourselves.
And act upon it accordingly, which actually means some difficult decisions in there as well.
Yes.
So, speaking of difficult decisions, kind, gentle, and loving, tell us about bunnies and book proposals.
Yes. I'm usually asked books, bunnies, and dragons. So I love that you linked it with the book, because that's the story that I tell. When I decided to write the book proposal for what would become Step Into Your Moxie, it was not a convenient time. I was busy and I didn't think that I needed to occupy the next 18 years of my life, not 18 years, 18 months of my life necessarily writing a book. However, I started to get these hits for what would ultimately become the chapters. And I sat down and I started to write things, and I knew that I needed to find an agent who understood this project and could help me find the right home for it. And I reached out to one of the peer-led mastermind communities I was a part of, spoke to my friends. Somebody introduced me to her agent, who at first it seemed like a perfect fit. And then I got the response that I needed a much bigger platform to basically triple my email subscriber list. And I'm sure you've had one of those moments where you feel like you're so close to something that you want, and then somebody tells you something, and then the chasm feels worlds apart, and you feel like this. And I had one of those moments where I started thinking about, maybe I will self-publish. And not to say that self-publishing is bad, but for me, that wasn't what I wanted. It felt like playing small. Then I even went so far as to say, maybe I should shelve this project altogether. Maybe there isn't an audience for it. And the reason that's connected to bunnies is because in that moment, I started to see bunnies everywhere, in places that you wouldn't normally see them. And to me, when I talk about women's leadership, there are two traditional archetypes for how women have been socialized to show up. And one is the bunny, which I'll describe in a moment. But seeing them all made me recognize, oof, even as I'm going out into the world and I'm delivering keynotes and leading corporate training about how women can step into their power, I'm doing the very opposite for myself. Because if you think about a bunny, it represents being soft and cute and cuddly and likable. And when we default to that kind of behavior with our communication or with our leadership, usually we are apologizing, whether we are literally saying, I'm sorry, when we have no reason to be, or we might be giving so much context rather than simply being direct and saying what we think, feel, or believe without using those words, think, feel, or believe. And that's what I was doing.
So let's go from, I can't resist, let's go from bunny-itis to the devil wears Prada.
Yes, dragonosis. So on the other side of the spectrum is when we want to step up. However, we almost become ridiculous and hyper masculine, meaning we make our communication our way or the highway. We are not open to feedback. Usually we're very intense. Sometimes we almost come across as angry. And while I wasn't doing that necessarily in that moment, for a lot of us, we don't have a paradigm of what it looks like to lead from a place of vulnerability and authenticity that also doesn't have an air of apology underneath it. In other words, one of the reasons that motivated me to write this book is providing for women and very conscious men a pathway toward being unapologetic about articulating our viewpoints and doing it from a perspective of compassion so that we connect 100% with the people we're seeking to move to take action. And ultimately, we co-create outcomes together.
Awesome. So how did you co-create Agent Steve?
So my agent and my husband happen to have the same name, Steve. And when I started to see all of these bunnies, I recognized that I knew at the core of my being that there was an agency I felt was supposed to represent this book. One of my early mentors had published with this particular agent several books, and I reached out. And I love following those intuitive hits because sometimes we just know something. I wasn't attached that it had to be this, but I recognize me stepping into my Moxie right now means that I write a great query letter. I reach out to this agent and then I bless and release, meaning I did my work and now I trust the universe will either deliver on this or something better is on its way. And in this case, something on its way happened very quickly. Agent Steve called maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours after I had sent an email, which is pretty atypical in any context, but certainly publishing. We got on the phone, and by the end of that conversation said, I believe in this project. I believe in your voice. I want to represent you in it.
Woohoo!
Yay!
So you're talking about speed. So now you're talking about the cheetah.
Yes. And that's ultimately what I did. So if we've got the bunny on one hand and we've got the dragon on the other, I like to say that the cheetah is not the middle way because both the bunny and the dragon are born out of a lack of worthiness. Mm-hmm. And the cheetah is not the middle ground. Rather, the cheetah is the way around that situation. Because if you think about a cheetah, for those who may not have watched Animal Planet growing up like I did, or in their current life, a cheetah is really amazing. She can accelerate faster, up to 65 miles per hour. She can accelerate faster than any other land mammal. How does she do that? She has a flexible spine, which allows her to be able to do this. But when she's not accelerating, she might be in the background, not being invisible, but watching and observing. If you think about the way a cheetah looks, there are tear marks that are permanently imprinted on her face. So as an archetype, she represents being aware of our emotions rather than being run by our emotions. So how does that show up in our interpersonal communication or presentation skills? We are observing what's going on with the people we're seeking to connect with. So we know when is it time to step up and assert our opinions, and when is it time to step back and ask a question and listen and be curious. How can we use our emotions as a way to inform how we connect with other people and not shove them down, pretend they don't exist, or ride the wave of an emotion that perhaps muddies our ability to be clear and concise?
Beautiful. Since we're talking about all these different animals now, I've got to take us off of the planet. I wasn't planning on going here at all. I have all my questions highlighted, and this one wasn't, but I feel called. Sigourney Weaver, an alien.
Yes. So Sigourney Weaver, an alien, I give all of these different examples of women who are sort of archetypes for either the bunny or for the cheetah or for the dragon, and I use her as one of those examples. For all of us, though, what is key is thinking about in those moments when we feel like we have used our voice in a way that we were able to connect with others, what were we doing in that experience? And more importantly, what were we not doing so that we can replicate that again and again and again?
So we're going to go to another animal and being kind of pigeonholed or chimpanzee-holded, if that's a word. Tell us about Milton and how we get our words out.
When I was in college, I was acting in addition to studying women's studies, and I was cast in this play by David Ives called Words, Words, Words. And I was cast in the role of Milton. Now, this is a totally ridiculous play. It's about chimpanzees who believe that they can type out great works of literature. But what the play is about is not as significant as the role I was cast in. So,
I've got to share because we've heard this, but I didn't know anybody actually turned it into a play. That if you threw a bunch of chimpanzees in a room and you gave them enough time, they're going to come up with Shakespeare or King Lear.
Yes, and I was cast as the very pragmatic chimp Milton. And that was stunning for me because I thought I might have been one of the other chimpanzees. One of them was a dreamer. But to be cast as the chimpanzee who was serious and who conformed to the status quo made me realize that I had probably been typecast because that was some of the feedback I was getting from other professors and other friends in my life. And I was code switching a lot in a way that I didn't like. So there might be a few people that I was very close with where I could use my humor and be a little bit ridiculous. But then in more areas than not, I was very serious and very proper and constantly using communication to hustle for other people's approval rather than being my authentic, playful self.
Now, moving forward, how did you transition it there? And how did you get to a place that the coat you're wearing is always the same one?
Because that's really the goal for all of us. While there still may be times, like if I'm going into a corporation, let's say, that's run by the military, it's a military contractor, I'm thinking about one of my clients, right? How I show up may be a little less playful than how I show up if I'm leading a women's retreat. But the essence of who I am stays the same. I might still use terms like cray-cray self-talk or unapologetic. Like my vocabulary is the same, even if I'm wearing a business suit versus a flowy skirt. And the way that we start to do that is we note what I call our secret sauce. What is the way that we tell stories? What is the way that we use space with our bodies? How do we naturally use vocal variety? Are we someone who speaks quickly? Are we somebody who's a little bit more slow and deliberate? Or are we a little bit all over the place? When we're excited, we're passionate, we're smiling, and then in the moments where we're serious, we slow down and we're a little bit more quiet. And once we own our default state, sure, there's ways we might want to be able to amplify our communication, but ultimately we want to bring those patterns, verbal and nonverbal, with us as much as possible.
Awesome. I want to go into some ways to overcome bunny habits in a minute. But first off, I heard an expression that I read in your book that maybe we can get some clarity on, cray-cray self-talk.
Yes, so that is my playful way of referring to self-talk that is not in our best interest. That's a little ridiculous.
Very good. All right. Bunny habits. I'll pull out a few fun ones here.
Okay, yeah. So I was going to say, tell me which are the ones you want us to jam on.
So unnecessary, I think, I feel, I believe, I mean, clarifying statements.
Yes, we don't need them. When we think, feel, or believe some way, it's inferred if we're presenting an idea that that's how we think, feel, or believe. And yet, when we're going bunny, we overuse those because we don't want to own an idea. When we say those words, it feels safer because someone could say back to us, oh, well, that's what you think, feel, but that's not right. Here's what the real answer is.
And on those lines, along with weak words, overusing weak verbs, poo-pooing things.
Yes. Rather than saying, she touched my heart with her words, or he slayed that speech, it was fantastic, we can fail to take ownership by using sometimes the passive voice or not using a verb that has a strong point of view to play it safe.
Daniel-san in Karate Kid.
When we are talking, we want to be clear. And this is different than being the cop. So the expression, and without watching the movie right now, it's not going to come out exactly as it does in the book, but it's like karate yes, karate no, karate so, smush like grape. That idea of having clarity, which is so important in our communication, rather than being wishy-washy and trying to have it both ways.
Which means we need to strike the word trying from our vocabulary.
And do it, get it done.
Absolutely. Another word that we should red flag when we're speaking, that we may be bunnying it up, saying sorry, particularly when we're not or don't feel we've done anything wrong.
Yes. The exception to that rule is when we've done something truly sorry worthy, we can take responsibility and then own what will we do differently moving forward. However, when we're going bunny, we will often say, I'm so sorry that I was 30 seconds late, or I'm so sorry that I jumped in, when oftentimes, A, we have no reason to be. B, sometimes we do it because we think it's a quid pro quo, meaning if I say I'm sorry, I'm doing it because I actually want you to apologize for something that you did. When the opportunity is for us to be direct and say, that hurt my feelings. That didn't feel good. Can we talk about that?
And that felt good for you to share about not feeling good. On that note, early on, you dropped the I word, intuition. How important is it to you, and how important is it for all of us to get out of our bunnyhood and trust on what's going on in the inside?
When we have moments of discomfort, typically we try to reason our way out and use our heads. And oftentimes, the more we try to go to logic or past experience, the more we feel stuck. Intuition is the ability to know beyond facts and experiences alone. And and I believe most of us actually have a pretty strong intuition. What we need to buff up is the ability to recognize it and then take action from it. And knowing, for example, that when something feels good, my body tends to lean a little bit forward, means that in those moments, let's say we're asking ourselves, I have a potential to take a new opportunity and move to a new city, and I'm not sure. We can do the pros list, we could do the cons list, but standing up and asking, do I move to, let's say it's Chicago, and then observing, do we move forward? Do we move backward? Becomes another way to tune into our bodies, to guide our communication, to guide our decisions.
Out of curiosity, do you full-on muscle test?
I do. And I want to be honest that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. For my daughter, who had a lot of allergies growing up, we took her to so many alternative therapists, and what was tough is that some people would tell us it was this based on their tests, and some people would tell us it was that. And for us, that was an experience where muscle testing proved a little confusing, truthfully. But then there's other examples where when it was time for my husband and me to make a decision about the future of my business, which is now our business, we muscle tested to decide, is it time for him to join me full time? And it was a spot on decision.
Awesome. I know it doesn't happen that much anymore, but emotion can still get involved for me. And so my trick, which works most of the time, not all the time, is I do a little loop and loop, is I'll put my hands behind the back, which somehow seems to take me out of the equation, as bizarre as it is. Let's go from there and let's talk real briefly about declaring your desired destination. Your now husband, Steve, proposes to you. You're thinking about something completely tangential.
Yes. When he proposed a long time ago at this point, 17, 18 years ago, I knew the answer to that question, which actually felt somewhat rhetorical, but I didn't know the answer to what, in my opinion, was a much more pressing question I needed to answer. Who do I want to be by the time I get married? Because at that particular point, I was under earning. I owed more in student loan money than I made in the course of a year, and I made the decision that for me, I wanted to be more in control of my financial future and leave the organization that I was working for and hang out my shingle as a coach. And I use that story as an example of one of the many times I've reverse engineered from my ideal outcome the communication that I'm going to sculpt. So in that case, I didn't want to actually 100% leave my employer. I wanted to give notice from my full-time position and convert one of the roles I had into a consulting role that I could do from home. So I framed that as an opportunity, not only for me, but for my organization. Why that would be a win-win to have me continue to lead this project in a more entrepreneurial way. And then I reverse engineered everything I was going to say and everything I was going to ask when I went into A, give notice, and B, say, don't completely let me go, hopefully. Rather, can we reframe this one role into a consulting job?
And what I think is brilliant, and I could go back, I guess, to your dad taking you on sales calls. There's this thing that you call the holy yes. You had some training early on in your life because that takes a lot of, I don't know how else to put it, chutzpah, particularly
the Hebrew version of Moxie.
Exactly, that's exactly it. That people are getting laid off left and right, and you come in and you say, "Here's what I want. And here's how we're going to convert this and why you're going to pay me more."
And that's what happened. And it came from a place of true belief that if I left 100%, it wouldn't have been good for my organization. I appreciate you mentioning the context because you're right. A bunch of my friends had been laid off. However, I also knew that I'd been pretty siloed. So one of the things that made leaving this position hard was that over the last few years, I had stepped into my Moxie and negotiated and received several consecutive pay raises. My job had morphed. And while I was still under earning, I was under earning a little bit less than I had been a few years prior, but nobody else knew what I did. And fortunately, that was the situation because that was a huge piece of my persuasive case that if I leave this project that has been wonderful for our organization's visibility, it's enabled us to raise grant money, it's a core to who we are, will likely not continue.
What is what you call sacred selling?
For most of us, the word selling, particularly if we are spiritual, feels inherently gross and slimy. And we often think of it from that male perspective of we have to go and convince somebody to do something, to spend money that is not actually in their best interest. And I would agree that sales that is about that is gross. However, I also believe that when we are operating from our values and from a genuine desire to positively, perhaps even radically improve people's lives, businesses, health, relationships, communication, and we're extending an invitation rather than convincing someone to do something they don't have the money or desire or bandwidth to do, that's actually a holy experience because it's emanating from our desire to be an agent for personal development. And for those of us who identify as coaches, consultants, experts, therapists, the range of helping professions, and by no means is that an exhaustive list, when we connect back to that place of holy service, not only does it embolden us to ask for what we're worth, to ask for the sale, it is enabling the people who've connected with us, who can benefit from us, to amplify their success, their well-being by giving them that invitation to do the work rather than running away from that and hoping maybe one day they'll search us out. That's actually selfish. It's putting the responsibility on that other person rather than us showing up, opening up, and giving people permission to make that decision for themselves because we've been very clear about what the opportunity is.
I'm so glad you shared on that. I often work with sales clients who maybe have to make calls or things of that sort, and they really truly believe in what they're doing.
Yes.
And I help them see that you're not bothering them to call them, but you're saying, how can I help you? And that's what you're talking about.
100%.
So let's talk about yes for one more minute here. What do you mean, believe that yes is your birthright?
If I'm to look back on some of the earlier years of my life, I was always surprised when something went well for me. It's the honest truth. I worked hard and a
Yeah.
lot of things did come to fruition, but my default script was always, it's probably going to be a no. Maybe it'll be a yes. And the pivot that I invite everyone into is believing that when you ask from this place of service, your answer that you're going to receive is either a yes or a not yet.
Mhm.
And when
Love
we
it.
know that if it's not this, it's something else that's better, and I'm going to unhook from an expectation of when that's going to show up and stay in that place of faith, it emboldens us to go after things for starters. And number two, if and when things don't go the way we want, again, we get to hook back into that no temporarily. It was not happening to us, it's happening for us. Maybe we have to work on our persuasive case if it's sales. Maybe we need to develop our resources or our experiences if people feel like we're not experienced enough. And it keeps us on that path of possibility rather than staying paralyzed, feeling it's just not going to work out and I should give up and fold.
Awesome. So let's go from there. Let's talk about the universe biting us in our bums. And let's talk about product launches, one that would have set your husband free, and then the 3 steps. And I'll guide you through those. First, the product launch.
I launch a program. I launch lots of different programs, but my signature speaker coaching program I launch every year in January. And this particular January, I was hoping that the launch would generate a certain amount of revenue that would provide a very clear sign it was time for my husband to leave his full-time job and join me in the business. And spoiler alert, the launch did not go the way that we intended. It went considerably worse than we had projected. Not only was my partner not going to be able to leave at that particular time, now he was going to actually have to leave where he was working, our home, Las Vegas, and work away Monday to Friday most weeks.
Wow.
And that felt devastating. However, I chose to approach it in a slightly different way, the ways we've been talking about, recognizing that while it felt like the universe was biting my bum, not seeing it as a constraint, but looking for what I affectionately refer to as the cosmic wink. What's the possibility here? How might this be happening for me rather than to me? And the big lesson I learned was that I'm a lot more resilient than I thought I was. I can grow my business from different creative ways, not putting all the pressure on this particular launch. And in this case, that was the exact time period where I finished my book proposal. I wound up with my dream agent and grew my signature mastermind, a different program I lead. And my husband wound up joining the business on the exact same day we had hoped he would. 6 months earlier, had that launch gone the way that we'd hoped. However, I had 6 months of colossal personal development as a result of having to be a little bit more creative than had things gone the way that I had hoped. And perhaps I wouldn't have finished my book proposal. Perhaps I wouldn't have invested in growing this other program that has had some amazing impact in the lives of the people who participated.
I love that you call it, thank you so much for sharing on that. And I love that you share on that and that you call it a cosmic wink, because you can only see the cosmic wink, as you're calling it, in reverse. If you're open and resilient and willing to step back and say, wait a second. In fact, you have 3 really cool steps to help with the cosmic wink. First, this question for God, and we'll go spiritual here for a second because I love it. What would you have me learn?
Yes. And that's what I asked over and over again in this experience and in lots of other experiences, without being attached to God is going to answer you on January 7th, whatever year it is, right? It's what would you have me learn, Lord? And trusting that lesson, if we've got our eyes open, is going to show up.
And then what's telling yourself a Hollywood story?
Yes. The Hollywood story means that you imagine if a movie were made about your life and this moment you're in that stinks was the climax and there was voiceover. You can envision whoever your celebrity doppelganger would be. I like to pretend that it's Anne Hathaway, who, is
Very cool.
having a blubbering moment, and there's this voiceover that says, and that was the moment, whatever her character was, learned X.
Dun, dun,
And
dun.
for me, in that experience, the voiceover was very clearly saying, and that was the moment that Lex recognized she could be an amazing entrepreneur and a very present mom. It didn't have to be one or the other.
Woohoo! And that takes us to the third step, reminding yourself you are wired to succeed.
Yeah. I mean, really, this step is sort of summarized in the title itself, is remembering that these moments, they're a pit stop. They're not the final destination. And that no matter what level of success we achieve, there's always going to be another glass ceiling we have to shatter for ourselves. And when we believe at our core that we're wired to be able to penetrate any one of those ceilings, that we are resilient, that's what gives us the ability to go through them without trying to rush how quickly we get to the other side.
Thank you. My wife, producer, always wants me to ask a question for parents and their kids. And it's interesting that you say rush to the other side. She's 10 weeks pregnant right now. And we don't want to rush, just allow into the experience. What advice would you give to parents for their kids today?
That's such a big one. Want to help me narrow when you say advice
for
parents?
helping kids to find their moxie.
Thank you. Role play. And it's something I talk about for grown-ups as the mom of a girl who's now almost 5 years old.
Yay.
And is at that age where she is constantly seeking to navigate through, how do I speak up for myself if a friend hurts my feelings? Or how do I speak up when I see another friend hurt another friend's feelings? Irrespective of the age we are, we have to give ourselves opportunities to say aloud what we want to say in those more high stakes emotional situations, so that when we get to them, we've already practiced, we have the words, and we have the muscle memory to be able to do it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I love that you shared it. It sounds like it was challenging toward the end of the pregnancy, to say the least. But I love that you shared that the pregnancy was a beautiful time.
Yes, it was.
Very cool. So I want to take off my coaching hat, Lex. I want to put it on you. What one homework assignment do you want to give people today to take action on?
Ooh, the pressure of only one.
Or 2 or 3 small ones.
Oh, right. I'm a firm believer when you pick one thing, you're much more likely to see a result. So I'm going to piggyback off of something we said a little bit earlier around the critic, the cop, and the cheerleader, is to identify which of those voices have you been defaulting most to. And take the time to identify what is that great coach question you can ask back, and to make a commitment that for the next 90 days, anytime you observe you're going negative Nelly, meaning you're going into one of those voices that's self-sabotaging, ask that coach question. Don't berate yourself, please, for going negative. That's not the goal, to stop it. The goal is to disrupt it with that coach question.
I love it. I consider that, I call that putting a monkey in the wheel. Poor monkey. But you're having a pattern interrupt to whatever is going on in your mind.
Yes.
Yeah. Completely different topic. What brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
It's a cliche answer, and it's the truth. Time with my family, being silly. Having the opportunity on my book tour to travel with them was fantastic, getting to share that experience. And sometimes it's just cuddling in bed at night, reading books.
Very, very cool. I got to ask, was it airplanes? Was it RV? How'd you travel together?
Yes, mainly airplanes, a little bit by car.
Very cool.
We'd get to an area, we'd fly up, and then we'd get to an area, and then we would drive.
I love it. And your little girl must be learning a lot about Moxie by watching you then.
She is. It's a quick story. at the time we're taping this, about a week ago was Halloween. And leaning into Halloween, initially she was going to be Minnie Mouse, which was fine. And as it got a little bit closer, she said, I'd like to be Susan B. Anthony because
Wow.
she stepped into her moxie. So she uses that phrase a lot. Sometimes she doesn't use it appropriately. Sometimes she does, because remember, she's still not quite 5. But she said she stepped into her moxie so that I could vote. And I believe it was yesterday, from when we're taping this, was the anniversary of when Susan B. Anthony was jailed for speaking up about women's right to vote. And at a moment, irrespective of political views, where more women are serving in the House of Representatives than ever before, and as governors and in different positions, what an amazing thing it is to remember that not that long ago, women didn't even have the right to vote.
Wow. And she's got a lot of moxie. You've got a strong girl on your hands.
I do indeed.
That's woohoo. So where can people go to find your beautiful book, Step Into Your Moxie, and to find out more?
Thank you. I've created a website called stepintoyourmoxie.com that folks can visit for lots of different options. The reason I also created the site, you can see the book trailer there. There's also a ton of order bonuses. So if you order somewhere else, head back there to get a bunch of free goodies. But you can find the book, Barnes & Noble, a lot of local bookstores, of course, Amazon. But like I said, I love to give people things that are practical cheat sheets related to the book. So you'll want to head to stepintoyourmoxie.com, even if you purchase the book somewhere else.
Fantastic. So if you didn't catch stepintoyourmoxie.com, come on over to inspirenationshow.com and we'll get you over to stepintoyourmoxie.com. Alexia, this has been phenomenal. Before we go into a meditation and let you go, any last words of wisdom you want to share with people?
That if you know that your words can positively, perhaps even radically improve people's lives, you have not only an opportunity, but a responsibility to speak up and share your voice.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we do have time for a very brief meditation then.
Yes. So wherever you are right now, if you would, and I'm going to do the same, uncross your legs, plant your feet in the ground.
Do this later if you're driving.
Yes, come back, please. Bring your shoulders back and relax and close your eyes, as I'm going to do as well. And take a few delicious deep breaths in and out. And you'll hear I'm making some noise. Don't be afraid to do that as well. Replenishing deep breath in through the gut. Let it fill your chest, come through your throat, up through your nose to the crown of your head. And as you exhale, even more slowly, let that breath move back through in reverse. And continue to breathe in your own time, allowing your body to relax a little bit more with each exhalation. And now bring to mind someone you are wanting to have a daring conversation with. Maybe it's a colleague, a client, a partner, a kiddo. And as you continue to breathe, imagine this person surrounded by brilliant, beautiful white light. And there may be some difficulty that has transpired between you and him or you and her. And as you start to feel your body perhaps tensing up, your mind time traveling back into a story of what happened, see if you can use your breath to bring peace to any parts that ache, to redirect from what happened to the present moment, where you are seeing this person surrounded by white light, by love. And without striving to do anything, see if as you inhale, you can envision white light coming from this person's heart to yours. Inhaling white light, letting it fill your body with peace. And as you exhale, sending white light back to the heart of this other person, unhooking from any feeling that is not serving you or them. And we're going to do this a few times, inhaling white light back from their heart to yours. And exhaling, white light being sent back from your heart to theirs. Inhale. And exhale. Inhale. Exhale. And now I want you to stay in this space for a moment. This space of peace and possibility that you have cultivated. And to remember that whatever happens next in this relationship, whatever you choose to say or not, whatever you choose to forgive, that you and this person have the possibility together to co-create whatever outcome you desire. And when you're ready, you can blink your eyes open and come back into the room. Come back into your body to come back into your voice.
Woohoo!
And now you can get back on the road and drive if you pulled over, right? Thank you for holding space for this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Alexia. This has been truly beautiful. I love your book, Step Into Your Moxie. I definitely want people to go out and get it. And it's so, I'm going to use a word that I rarely use in describing a book, delicious. It's so personable. And so we learn best with stories, and it's filled with so many great stories and then lots of how-to that I really think it's going to help people to step into their voice, to be more visible, to be able to be an agent of change in their own world, whatever that looks like, maybe just a little bit less unafraid.
Yes.
So
thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, step into your moxie, and begin amplifying your voice and visibility today, and shine bright. Woohoo!
Yay!
Thank you so much, Alexia.
My pleasure. Thank you for this opportunity and for knowing my book perhaps even better than I know it at this stage. I'm kidding, but yeah, what a treat.
Yay, yay, yay. I'm so glad you liked it. Then I have done my job, and many others are going to find this amazing as well.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!